The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, and Victoria Delacroix knew immediately that her carefully constructed world in Boston was about to crumble like the pages of the ancient books she so loved to restore. She stood in the dusty office of the Western Marriage Bureau, her hands trembling slightly as she read the notice informing her that her position at the Athenaeum had been eliminated due to budget constraints. 3 years of cataloging rare manuscripts, of breathing life into forgotten texts, gone in an instant. Her modest inheritance from her father had dried up months ago, spent on keeping her small apartment and maintaining the appearance of respectability that Boston society demanded. The truth was far more grim than anyone suspected. Victoria was educated, proud, and utterly broke. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Patterson, watched her with knowing eyes. "We have several gentlemen out west looking for educated women," she said carefully. "Not all of them want simple housekeepers. Some want companions who can read and write, who can help build something meaningful." Victoria's pride bristled at the suggestion, but her empty stomach reminded her that pride would not pay her rent. She had received 3 eviction notices, each more insistent than the last. The life of a 23-year-old woman alone in Boston with no family and no prospects was precarious at best. "What are my options?" Victoria asked, hating the desperation she heard in her own voice. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a leather-bound book filled with correspondence. "There's a rancher in Arizona Territory, Old Tucson. His name is Zachary Harrison. He's 30 years old, owns a modest cattle ranch, and specifically requested someone who could teach reading and writing to the children in the area. He lost his mother 2 years ago and has been managing alone ever since." Arizona. The very word conjured images of sun-scorched desert and dangerous men. Victoria had read about the territory in the newspapers, about outlaws and Apache conflicts, about a land so harsh it could break even the strongest souls. "What kind of man is he?" Victoria asked. Mrs. Patterson smiled softly. "His letters are some of the kindest I've received. He's honest about his circumstances. The ranch isn't large, but it's profitable. He doesn't promise luxury, but he promises respect and partnership. That's more than most men offer." Victoria took the letter Mrs. Patterson offered and read it slowly. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with obvious concentration. The spelling was mostly correct, though there were a few errors that made her heart soften unexpectedly. He wrote about the land he loved, about the responsibility he felt toward his workers and their families, about wanting to build a school someday. He wrote about his mother, who had taught him to read using an old Bible and a dictionary, and how he wanted to honor her memory by bringing education to the isolated community. There was no poetry in his words, no flourishing phrases or romantic declarations, but there was something else. Something genuine and humble that touched a place in Victoria's heart she had thought long hardened by her struggles. "I'll write to him," Victoria said finally. Over the next 6 weeks, letters flew between Boston and Old Tucson. Victoria was honest about her education, her work at the Athenaeum, her love of literature and learning. She did not hide her pride in her accomplishments or her strong opinions about women's rights and education. She expected her frankness to dissuade him, but Zachary's responses only grew warmer. He wrote about growing up on the ranch, about learning to rope cattle before he could properly write his name. He wrote about the mistakes he made, the lessons learned through hardship, the humility that came from depending on the land and weather for survival. He never once suggested that her education was intimidating or unwomanly. Instead, he seemed genuinely excited about what she could bring to their community. In his final letter before she made her decision, He wrote something that sealed her fate. "I know I'm not the kind of man you probably imagined marrying. I can't quote Shakespeare or discuss philosophy. But I can promise you that I'll respect your mind as much as your heart, and I'll work every day to be worthy of the gift you'd be giving me by coming west." Victoria packed her few belongings into 2 trunks. Her books took up most of the space. She sold everything else to pay for her train ticket, keeping only her mother's pearl necklace and her father's pocket watch. As the train carried her away from Boston in late November, she watched the familiar streets disappear and felt a strange mixture of terror and anticipation. The journey took nearly 2 weeks. She changed trains in Chicago, then again in Kansas City. Each station took her further from everything she had known and deeper into a landscape that grew increasingly foreign. The cities gave way to prairies, the prairies to desert. Other passengers came and went, their faces blurring together until she felt utterly alone despite the crowded cars. When the train finally pulled into Tucson, Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed her traveling dress, a dark blue wool that was far too heavy for the Arizona heat, and checked her reflection in the small mirror she carried. Her dark hair was still mostly contained in its careful bun, though tendrils had escaped during the long journey. Her gray eyes looked enormous in her pale face. She looked exactly like what she was, a terrified Eastern woman completely out of her element. The platform was chaos. Cowboys and miners, Mexican families and Chinese laborers, all moving with purpose through the dusty November afternoon. The air smelled of creosote and horse manure and something else she couldn't identify, something wild and sun-baked. "Miss Delacroix." Victoria turned and found herself looking at a man who took her breath away, though not in the way she had expected. Zachary Harrison was tall and lean, his skin tanned dark from years under the desert sun. He wore simple work clothes, clean but obviously well worn, dark trousers, a blue cotton shirt, a brown vest, and a hat that he quickly removed when she met his eyes. Those eyes were startlingly blue, like pieces of the Arizona sky, and they looked at her with an expression of such open, honest hope that Victoria felt her careful composure crack. "Mr. Harrison," she said, extending her hand. He took it carefully, his palm calloused and warm. "Please call me Zachary or Zach, everyone does." His voice was deep and soft with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Welcome to Arizona territory. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long," Victoria admitted, "but I managed." He smiled then, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "I reckon that's about the best anyone can say about crossing half the country on a train. Let me get your trunks." Victoria watched as he hefted her heavy trunks with ease, muscles flexing beneath his shirt. A younger man, perhaps 17 or 18, hurried over to help. He had the same blue eyes as Zachary and similar features. "This is my brother Samuel," Zachary said. "Sam, this is Miss Delacroix." Samuel grinned widely. "Pleased to meet you, madam." "Zach's been nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs waiting for your train." "Sam," Zachary said, his ears reddening slightly. Victoria found herself smiling despite her nerves. "It's nice to meet you, Samuel." They loaded her trunks into a sturdy wagon, and Zachary helped her onto the seat with careful courtesy. As they left the bustle of Tucson behind, Victoria studied the landscape with fascination. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touching the endless sky. The desert stretched out in all directions, dotted with strange plants she had only read about. Saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, palo verde trees with their green bark, and ocotillo with their long, whip-like branches. "It's not what you're used to, I imagine," Zachary said quietly. No, Victoria agreed, but it has its own beauty. A harsh beauty, perhaps, but beautiful nonetheless. He glanced at her with surprise and pleasure. That's exactly right. Most folks from back east just call it ugly. Most folks from back east have never learned to see past what's familiar, Victoria said. I may be proud, Mr. Harrison, but I'm not closed-minded. Zachary, he corrected gently, and I'm glad to hear it. Real glad. The ranch was about 8 miles from town, following a road that was more suggestion than fact. They passed a few other properties, some prosperous-looking, others barely more than shacks. Samuel kept up a steady stream of conversation from the back of the wagon, pointing out landmarks and telling stories that made Victoria laugh despite her anxiety. When they finally turned onto a narrow track marked by 2 tall posts, Victoria felt her stomach tighten. This was it. Her new home or her biggest mistake? Possibly both. The ranch house came into view gradually. It was a low adobe structure, larger than she had expected but simple in design. A covered porch ran along the front, providing shade from the intense sun. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a smaller structure that might be a bunkhouse, and various corrals. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the late afternoon light. It's not much, Zachary said, and Victoria heard the nervousness in his voice. But it's solid. The walls are thick, so it stays cool in summer and warm in winter. There's a good well, never goes dry, and the land supports about 200 head of cattle plus the horses. It's wonderful, Victoria said honestly. I was expecting something much more primitive. Zachary's shoulders relaxed slightly. My mother insisted on certain things. Good windows, a real floor, a kitchen with a proper stove. She came from St. Louis and refused to live like a savage, as she put it. He helped Victoria down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close and Victoria caught the scent of him. Soap and leather and sun-warmed cotton. It was not unpleasant. I should show you inside, Zachary said, stepping back quickly. You must be exhausted. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the brightness outside. Victoria's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in details. The main room served as both parlor and dining area. The furniture was simple but well made. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with shelves on either side holding a few books and various objects. Everything was clean but had a masculine, slightly neglected quality, as if the inhabitants kept the dirt at bay but had forgotten about comfort. Your room is through here, Zachary said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a modest bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small desk beneath the window. I know it's plain, but you can fix it up however you like. We can get fabric in town, or whatever else you need. Victoria set down her small bag and looked around. The room was indeed plain, but it was larger than her apartment in Boston had been, and the window looked out over the desert toward those distant mountains. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. Zachary shifted his weight, clearly uncertain. There's something we should probably discuss. The preacher. When did you want to? I mean, we could go to town tomorrow, or we could wait a few days if you need time to settle in, or longer. Whatever you want. Victoria turned to face him fully. He looked so uncomfortable, this tall, strong man who could probably handle wild horses and dangerous cattle without flinching, utterly undone by the logistics of marriage. Something in her chest softened. Let me ask you something, Zachary, she said carefully. Are you having second thoughts? Now that you've seen me, now that I'm real and not just words on paper. His eyes widened. No, Lord, no, you're even more than I hoped. I'm just worried that you might be having second thoughts. This place, it's rough compared to Boston, and I'm not educated like you. I do my best, but I know there's a lot I don't know. Education comes in many forms, Victoria said. You know things I could never learn from books. You built this place. You sustain it. That takes intelligence and dedication. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's fact. Victoria took a breath. I won't lie to you. I'm terrified. I've left everything familiar and traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. But I read your letters, Zachary. I read them many times. You wrote with honesty and humility, and those are qualities I value more than polished grammar. So you're not going to catch the next train back east? He asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Victoria's decision for her. No, she said firmly. I'm not. We made an agreement and I intend to honor it. Tomorrow is fine for the wedding if that suits you. The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. Tomorrow, then. I'll let Preacher Matthews know first thing in the morning. That night, Victoria lay in her new bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind whispered through the desert plants. Somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied softly. She thought about the man sleeping somewhere else in this house, the stranger who would be her husband in less than 24 hours. She thought about the leap of faith she was taking, and the leap he was taking too. He was risking his heart and home on a proud Boston spinster who might never adapt to this harsh land. But she would adapt. Victoria Delacroix had survived the deaths of both parents, poverty, and the condescension of Boston society. She could survive the Arizona desert and build something meaningful here. She had to believe that. Morning came early on the ranch. Victoria woke to the sound of roosters and men's voices, the jingle of harnesses and the lowing of cattle. She washed quickly in the basin of water someone had left outside her door, then dressed in her best gown, a gray silk that had been her mother's. It was hopelessly formal for a ranch wedding, but it was all she had. When she emerged from her room, she found the kitchen bustling with activity. An older Mexican woman was cooking at the stove, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Samuel sat at the large wooden table, eating with enthusiasm. Zachary stood by the window, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: dark trousers, a white shirt, a black vest, and a string tie. He had shaved carefully, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression made Victoria's breath catch. He looked at her as if she were something precious and impossible, a miracle he hadn't quite dared to hope for. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The older woman turned from the stove and smiled broadly. "Señorita Delacroix, I am Consuela. I cook for the ranch hands and help with the house." "Welcome, welcome." "Thank you, Consuela." "It's wonderful to meet you." "You must eat something before the wedding," Consuela insisted. "A bride needs strength for such an important day." Victoria sat at the table, and Consuela placed a plate before her piled high with eggs, bacon, and fresh tortillas. The food was delicious, though Victoria's nervous stomach made eating difficult. Zachary sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee and watching her with those startling blue eyes. "The preacher will meet us at the church in town at 10, he said. "Sam will drive us in the wagon. Some of the ranch hands want to come too, if that's all right with you. Word got around about the wedding." "Of course that's all right," Victoria said. "Though I confess I'm nervous about meeting so many new people at once." "They're good folks," Zachary assured her. "A little rough around the edges, maybe, but good hearts. They're excited about the school you're going to help set up." "You told them about that?" "I told them about you," he said quietly. "About how educated you are, how you worked with old books in Boston, how you want to teach." It gave them hope, I think. Most of them have families, kids who need learning. Victoria felt a flutter of anticipation beneath her nervousness. A school. A real purpose beyond just survival. I'd like that very much. They arrived in Old Tucson at 9:45. The church was a simple white structure with a wooden cross above the door. Despite Zachary's modesty, quite a crowd had gathered. Ranch hands in their cleanest shirts, Mexican families in colorful dresses, a few townspeople curious about the Eastern bride. Victoria felt all their eyes on her as Zachary helped her down from the wagon. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "Just breathe." Preacher Matthews was a jovial man in his 50s with kind eyes and a booming voice. He greeted Victoria warmly and led them into the small church. The ceremony was brief and simple. Victoria and Zachary stood before the altar, surrounded by wooden pews and the smell of old hymn books. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "Do you, Zachary Harrison, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Preacher Matthews asked. "I do," Zachary said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Victoria Delacroix, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Victoria looked at Zachary, at this humble, kind man who had written such honest letters, who looked at her with respect and hope. "I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, young man." Zachary leaned in carefully, giving Victoria plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met in a brief, soft kiss that sent unexpected warmth through Victoria's entire body. When they pulled apart, his eyes held wonder, and she suspected hers did too. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People surged forward to congratulate them, shaking Zachary's hand and welcoming Victoria to the community. The faces blurred together, but everyone seemed genuinely happy. Several women promised to visit once Victoria was settled, and a few mentioned their children who needed teaching. Consuela had prepared a special dinner back at the ranch. The dining table groaned under platters of food. Roasted beef, beans, rice, fresh tortillas, and a cake that Consuela admitted had taken her 3 tries to get right. The ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse joined them, along with Samuel and an older man named Bill who served as foreman. Victoria found herself relaxing as the meal progressed. The men were respectful and friendly, telling stories about the ranch and asking her questions about Boston. She described the Athenaeum, the old books and manuscripts, the feeling of holding something that had survived for centuries. They listened with genuine interest, these men who worked with their hands and lived close to the land. "It's like you're a cowboy for words," said a young hand named Pete, "roping up old stories and bringing them back to life." Victoria laughed, delighted by the analogy. "I suppose that's exactly right." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the guests began to disperse. The ranch hands headed to the bunkhouse, calling out final congratulations. Samuel announced he would sleep in the barn, giving the newlyweds privacy. Consuela cleaned up the kitchen with quiet efficiency, then left for her small house on the edge of the property. Suddenly, Victoria and Zachary were alone in the quiet house, husband and wife, still virtual strangers. Zachary cleared his throat. "I should probably explain something about the sleeping arrangements. I wasn't presuming anything. There's another small bedroom that I've been using. You don't have to. We don't have to. I mean, we can take time to get to know each other properly before." He trailed off, his face reddening. Victoria's heart swelled with affection for this man who was trying so hard to be respectful. "That's very considerate, Zachary, but we are married now. I'm not expecting romance novels, but I think sharing a room would be appropriate. We can take things slowly, though. Is that agreeable?" "More than agreeable," he said quietly. "I want you to feel comfortable here, Victoria. This is your home now." That first night they lay in the darkness of the bedroom, careful not to touch, talking in quiet voices. Zachary told her about the ranch, about the patterns of seasons in the desert, about his hopes for expanding the herd. Victoria told him about books she loved, about her parents and her childhood, about the loneliness of being a woman alone in Boston with no family. "I'm glad you're here," Zachary said finally. "I know it's not what you're used to, but I'm going to do my best to make you happy." "I believe you," Victoria said, and she did. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Victoria woke early, something that would have been unthinkable in Boston, and joined Zachary for breakfast. He would head out to work the ranch, and she would tackle the house. It needed organization, a woman's touch that had been missing for 2 years. She rearranged furniture, made curtains from fabric purchased in town, and set up a small library corner with her precious books. Consuela became her ally and friend, teaching her how to cook for ranch hands, how to preserve food in the desert heat, how to make do with limited resources. Victoria, in turn, helped Consuela with reading and writing. The older woman wanted to write letters to her family in Sonora, and Victoria gladly helped her craft messages in Spanish and English. Zachary kept his promise to take things slowly, but gradually, their relationship deepened. He taught her to ride, patiently walking beside her horse until she gained confidence. She helped him with paperwork and accounts, bringing order to the chaos of his record keeping. They talked endlessly, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. One evening about a month after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Zachary reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. Victoria squeezed back, and when she looked at him, she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. This was becoming real. This marriage of convenience was transforming into something deeper. "I'm falling in love with you," Zachary said quietly. "I know it's maybe too soon to say it, but it's the truth, and I promised always to be honest with you." Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. "It's not too soon. I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't expect it, but it's happening all the same." He leaned in and kissed her, and this time it was not the brief, formal kiss of their wedding. This was deep and full of longing and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. That night, their marriage became complete. Zachary was gentle and patient, and Victoria discovered that physical intimacy with this man she was learning to love was nothing like the cold, embarrassing ordeal she had been led to expect. It was sweet and tender and full of genuine connection. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt truly at home for the first time since leaving Boston. December brought cooler weather and preparations for Christmas. Victoria threw herself into planning a celebration for the ranch community. She baked cookies using Consuela's oven, made simple decorations, and organized a gift exchange. Zachary watched her efforts with obvious delight, helping wherever he could. On Christmas Eve, they gathered everyone in the ranch house. The room glowed with candle light and the warmth of the fire. Victoria had arranged for each child in the community to receive a book, modest volumes purchased in Tucson but precious nonetheless. The children's faces lit up as they opened their gifts, and the parents looked at Victoria with gratitude. "I want to start the school after New Year's," Victoria announced. "We can use the barn temporarily until we build a proper schoolhouse. Classes will be in the mornings, 3 days a week to start. Any child is welcome, regardless of their family's means." The announcement was met with enthusiastic approval. Several parents approached her immediately, wanting to enroll their children. Zachary stood beside her, his hand resting proudly on the small of her back, and Victoria felt a surge of purpose and belonging. The school became Victoria's passion. Zachary and the ranch hands cleared out a section of the barn, building benches and a large table to serve as desks. Victoria made slates from smooth boards and chalk. She created lesson plans, starting with basic reading and arithmetic. On the first day of class in early January 1883, 15 children showed up, ranging in age from 5 to 14. They were a mixed group: Anglo, Mexican, and one Apache boy whose family worked on a neighboring ranch. Victoria quickly discovered that teaching was far more challenging than she had anticipated. The children had vastly different skill levels, from those who had never held a pencil to a few who could read simple words. Managing them all simultaneously required patience and creativity. But she loved it. Watching understanding dawn on a child's face, seeing them sound out their first words, witnessing their pride at accomplishment made every frustration worthwhile. Zachary often stopped by during lessons, ostensibly to check on something in the barn but really to watch her teach. Afterward, he would tell her how amazing she was, how the children were lucky to have her. His pride in her accomplishments meant more than any accolades she had received in Boston. By March, the spring roundup demanded all of Zachary's attention. Victoria watched him leave before dawn and return after dark, exhausted and covered in dust. She worried about him, about the dangers of working with cattle and horses. One evening he came home with a gash on his arm from a run-in with a particularly ornery steer. Victoria cleaned and bandaged it, her hands trembling with fear. "It's nothing," Zachary assured her. "Happens all the time." "That doesn't make it less frightening," Victoria said. "I just found you. I don't want to lose you." He pulled her close. "You're not going to lose me. I'm careful out there. I have too much to come home to." She kissed him fiercely, and he responded with equal passion. Their love had grown steadily over the months, deepening from attraction and affection into something profound. They balanced each other perfectly. Her education complemented his practical wisdom. Her pride in her abilities was tempered by his humility. His kindness brought out her softer side. They were, against all odds and expectations, a perfect fit. In April, Victoria missed her monthly course. She waited another month before saying anything, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. But when June arrived and she still had not bled, and when morning nausea became a regular occurrence, she knew. She told Zachary one evening as they sat on the porch, "I think I'm going to have a baby." He went very still, then turned to her with wonder written across his face. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. The signs are all there." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. Then he was kissing her, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby. We're having a baby. Victoria, you've made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed well. Victoria continued teaching through the summer, though the heat made it challenging. The community rallied around her, the women offering advice and help. Consuela fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and eat special foods. Zachary became almost comically protective, worrying about everything from her riding to her lifting books. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Victoria reminded him regularly. "I know, but I can't help it." "You're carrying something precious." In September, as the heat began to ease, Victoria taught her last class before the baby was due. The children had made remarkable progress over the past 8 months. Several could read simple books now, and all had mastered basic arithmetic. More importantly, they loved learning. Victoria had instilled in them a hunger for knowledge that would serve them throughout their lives. As the children filed out that last day, the oldest girl, Maria, hung back. "Thank you, Senora Harrison," she said quietly. "You made me believe I could be more than just a rancher's wife someday. Maybe I could be a teacher too." Victoria embraced her gently. "You can be anything you want, Maria. Never let anyone tell you different." After the girl left, Victoria sat alone in the barn classroom, her hand resting on her swollen belly. A year ago, she had been desperate and alone in Boston, her future bleak and uncertain. Now she had a husband she loved, a community that valued her, meaningful work, and a child on the way. The journey had been terrifying, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Zachary found her there, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "No," she said, laughing and crying at once. "I'm just happy. Ridiculously, impossibly happy." He sat beside her and pulled her close. "Me too. Every single day." Victoria went into labor on a cool October morning. Consuela and two other experienced women from neighboring ranches attended her, while Zachary paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Victoria drew on every bit of strength and stubbornness she possessed, the same qualities that had gotten her through losing her parents, through poverty, through the terrifying journey west. Just after midnight, as a new day dawned, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment they placed him in her arms, exhausted and sweaty and more depleted than she had ever been, Victoria felt her heart expand impossibly. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would, she suspected, turn blue like his father's. Zachary came in moments later, his face pale with anxiety. When he saw Victoria holding their son, his expression transformed into pure joy. "Is he? Are you?" "We're both fine," Victoria said. "Come meet your son." Zachary approached slowly, almost reverently. Victoria placed the baby in his arms, and the big, strong rancher began to cry. "He's so small, so perfect." "We're calling him Thomas," Victoria said, "after my father." "Thomas Harrison," Zachary said, testing the name. "It's perfect, just like his mama." Recovery took time, but Victoria was young and strong. Consuela helped with the baby during the first difficult weeks, but Victoria quickly found her rhythm. She discovered that she loved being a mother, loved the weight of Thomas in her arms, loved watching Zachary hold him with such gentle wonder. By Christmas, Thomas was thriving, growing fat and happy. Victoria had resumed teaching, though on a reduced schedule, with the baby often sleeping in a basket nearby. The older girls in the class loved helping with him, treating him like a living doll. One snowy January evening, as they celebrated Thomas's 3-month milestone, Zachary gave Victoria a gift. It was a leather-bound journal, beautifully made. "For your thoughts," he explained. "You're always helping me with writing and accounts. I thought maybe you'd like to write down your own stories too." Victoria opened the journal and saw that he had written on the first page, the letters careful and precise. "For Victoria, who taught me that education and humility can go hand in hand. With all my love, Zachary." She threw her arms around him, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby in his lap. "I love you so much. I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." The years flowed by like water in the desert, precious and life-giving. Victoria continued teaching and the school grew. By 1885, Zachary had built a proper schoolhouse with money saved from good cattle sales. It was a source of pride for the whole community, a small wooden building with real desks and a blackboard. Victoria taught there 5 days a week, and her reputation spread. Families from miles around sent their children to her. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy. Victoria taught him to read by age 4, and he absorbed knowledge like the desert absorbed rain. In 1886, Victoria gave birth to a daughter, Sarah, who had her mother's gray eyes and her father's gentle temperament. 2 years later came another son, Daniel, boisterous and wild. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management. He proved himself not just a skilled cattleman but a shrewd businessman. He treated his workers fairly, paying decent wages and ensuring their families were cared for. In return, he earned their loyalty and hard work. The herd grew from 200 head to nearly 500. Zachary hired more hands, built a larger bunkhouse, expanded the grazing land. But success never changed him. He remained the humble, kind man who had written those honest letters to a desperate woman in Boston. He still worked alongside his hands, still came home dusty and tired, still looked at Victoria with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding day. Victoria watched their children grow, teaching them not just academics but values. She raised them to respect all people regardless of their background, to value education and hard work equally, to be humble like their father and proud of their accomplishments like their mother. Thomas showed signs of his father's skill with animals. Sarah loved books even more than Victoria did. Daniel was fearless and funny, keeping everyone entertained. In 1890, Samuel got married to a sweet girl from town, and Zachary built them a house on the far side of the ranch property. The brothers worked together, expanding the operation and reputation of the Harrison Ranch. Victoria welcomed Samuel's wife, Emma, teaching her about desert life just as Consuela had taught her years earlier. Life was not without challenges. Droughts tested their resilience. Cattle prices fluctuated. The children got sick, though thankfully never seriously. Victoria experienced a miscarriage in 1888 that devastated them both, but they supported each other through the grief and emerged stronger. By 1892, 10 years after Victoria had stepped off that train in Tucson, the ranch was one of the most successful in the region. The school had educated over 100 children. Thomas was nearly 9, Sarah was 6, and Daniel was 4. They were healthy, happy children who knew they were loved. One evening in September, Victoria and Zachary sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The children were asleep inside. The desert night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked. "Leaving Boston, giving up that life?" Victoria looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once." "Do you regret taking a chance on an educated, proud spinster from back east?" "How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" He took her hand, his touch as warm and steady as always. "You know what I think about sometimes? That letter I wrote to the marriage bureau, I almost didn't send it. I thought no woman would want to come out here, especially not someone educated like you. I figured I'd spend my life alone." "I almost didn't respond either," Victoria admitted. "My pride told me that becoming a mail-order bride was beneath me, that I should figure something else out. But I had no other options, and honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, finding you, building this life, our children, the school, everything. We fit perfectly," Zachary said softly, "like two pieces of a puzzle that shouldn't match but somehow do." "Yes," Victoria agreed. "Perfectly." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. From inside came a small cry. Daniel probably having a nightmare. Victoria started to rise, but Zachary stopped her. "I'll get him," he said. "You rest." She watched her husband go inside, heard his gentle voice soothing their son. A few minutes later, the crying stopped. When Zachary emerged, he was carrying Daniel, who had fallen back asleep on his father's shoulder. "He just needed to know someone was there," Zachary said, settling back beside Victoria with the boy cradled against him. Victoria rested her head on Zachary's free shoulder, creating a small family tableau. This was her life now. This humble, kind cowboy and their children, this harsh, beautiful desert, this community she had helped educate and shape. She was still educated and still proud of her accomplishments, but she had learned humility too, learned from Zachary's example. She had learned that strength came in many forms, that wisdom was not just found in books, that love could grow in the most unexpected places. The years continued to unfold with both joy and challenge. In 1893, Victoria published a small primer for teaching reading, based on her years of experience. It was printed in Tucson and distributed to schools throughout the territory. Seeing her name on a published work again filled her with pride, but not the defensive, desperate pride of her Boston days. This was pride tempered with gratitude and humility. Thomas showed remarkable talent with horses, training them with a patience and gentleness that made Zachary beam. By 14, in 1895, he was helping significantly with ranch operations. Sarah developed into a voracious reader and talented writer. She talked about becoming a teacher like her mother, or maybe even a journalist. Daniel remained the wild child, but his fearlessness served him well in the demanding work of ranch life. In 1896, Victoria gave birth to one more surprise baby, a girl they named Grace. At 37, Victoria had thought her childbearing years were over, but Grace arrived healthy and beautiful, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. The older children doted on her, and Zachary was utterly smitten. 5 children, he marveled one night as they watched Grace sleep in her cradle. When I was alone on this ranch, I never imagined I'd be blessed with so much family. Neither did I, Victoria said. When I was alone in that tiny Boston apartment, barely scraping by, I thought I'd die alone and forgotten. Instead, I have this full, rich life. The turn of the century brought changes. Arizona was moving toward statehood, though it would take years yet. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, though the land remained harsh and demanding. The Harrison Ranch continued to thrive. Zachary, now 47, had a bit of silver in his hair but was still strong and vital. Victoria, at 41, had laugh lines around her eyes and a few silver threads of her own, but she was happy and healthy. Thomas, at 17, was practically running the ranch alongside his father. He had fallen in love with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a sensible girl named Lucy who could ride and rope as well as any man. Victoria saw in their courtship echoes of her own relationship with Zachary. 2 people who complemented each other perfectly, who brought out the best in one another. Sarah, 14, was teaching younger children at the schoolhouse, apprenticing under Victoria. She had her mother's gift for education and her father's patience. Daniel, 12, was still a handful but showed signs of settling into his role on the ranch. Grace, at 3, was everyone's darling, charming adults and children alike with her sunny disposition. One warm spring evening in 1900, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch. Samuel and Emma had 4 children of their own now. Bill, the old foreman, had retired but still visited regularly. Consuela, now in her 70s, still cooked for special occasions. The long tables set up outside groaned under the weight of food and celebration. It was Victoria's 41st birthday, though the celebration had expanded to include the entire community. People from neighboring ranches, families whose children had learned to read in Victoria's schoolhouse, workers past and present, all came to honor the Eastern woman who had become such an integral part of their world. Zachary stood to speak, and the crowd quieted. Most of you know the story of how Victoria came here. A mail-order bride from Boston, educated and proud, coming to marry a simple cowboy. I was terrified when I went to meet her train. I thought she'd take one look at me in this place and catch the next train back east. Laughter rippled through the crowd, Victoria smiled, remembering that day, her own terror and uncertainty. "But she stayed," Zachary continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "She stayed and she built a school. She taught our children to read and write. She brought culture and learning to this rough place. She gave me a family and a life I never dreamed possible. But most of all, she taught me that different kinds of people can fit together perfectly, that education and humility aren't opposites, that pride in your accomplishments and humility about who you are can exist in the same person." He looked directly at Victoria, tears in his blue eyes. "You made me better. You made all of us better. Happy birthday, my love." The crowd erupted in applause. Victoria stood, her own eyes wet, and embraced her husband. Around them, their children watched with the secure happiness of young people who know they are deeply loved. The community they had built together celebrated under the desert stars. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Victoria and Zachary walked out to the spot where they had first said, "I love you," years earlier. The desert stretched around them, vast and eternal. The mountains stood dark against the starlit sky. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked. "When you wrote that letter to the marriage bureau?" "No," Zachary said honestly. "I hoped for a companion, maybe, someone to share the work and the loneliness. I never imagined love or children or building something that would last beyond us." "The school will last," Victoria said. "The children we taught will teach their children. Sarah might even take over when I'm too old. That's a legacy I'm proud of. I'm proud of it too, proud of you, always." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness. This educated, proud woman and this humble, kind man who had found each other across 2,000 miles and against all odds. They had created something beautiful together, something that would endure. Their children would carry forward the values they had instilled: respect for all people, the importance of education, the value of hard work, the necessity of humility, the right to be proud of your accomplishments. The Harrison Ranch would continue, built on fair dealing and good stewardship. The school would teach generations of children. But beyond all that, they had found love. True, deep, lasting love that had grown from awkward beginnings into something unshakable. They had proven that two very different people from vastly different worlds could not just coexist but thrive together, could bring out the best in each other, could build a life of meaning and joy. As they walked back to the house, arms around each other, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The fear and desperation that had driven her to answer a stranger's letter. The terror of leaving everything familiar. The uncertainty of that first meeting, the awkwardness of those early days, the gradual transformation from strangers to partners to lovers. If she could go back and tell that frightened young woman on the train what awaited her, Victoria knew she would hardly believe it. That the rough cowboy waiting at the station would become the love of her life. That the harsh desert would become home. That she would find more purpose and fulfillment in teaching ranch children than she ever had cataloging ancient manuscripts. That she would bear 5 children and find joy in motherhood that eclipsed anything her career had offered. She had been educated and proud, qualities that society often saw as faults in a woman. But Zachary had valued those qualities, had encouraged and supported her. She had been allowed to keep her pride while learning humility, to maintain her love of learning while gaining wisdom from the land and the people who worked it. And Zachary, humble and kind, had gained confidence from her belief in him. He had learned to value his own intelligence and capabilities, to see that his practical wisdom was just as important as book learning. Together, they had each become more fully themselves, more complete. The house was quiet when they entered. Grace stirred in her cradle but settled back to sleep. They checked on each child, pulling blankets up, placing gentle kisses on foreheads. These beautiful children, each unique, each carrying forward the best of both parents, in their own bedroom they prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Victoria brushed out her hair while Zachary removed his boots. They moved around each other with unconscious grace, each knowing where the other would be, what they would need. As they lay in bed, Zachary pulled Victoria close. She rested her head on his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. This man who had been a stranger was now more familiar than her own reflection. She knew every line of his face, every scar and callus, every expression. She knew his moods, his thoughts, often before he spoke them, and he knew her just as well. "I love you," he said quietly. "More now than on our wedding day, more than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Victoria replied. "My humble, kind cowboy who somehow made me complete. And you're my educated, proud wife who did the same for me." They drifted to sleep holding each other, as they had done thousands of nights before and would do thousands more. Outside, the desert night was cool and peaceful. The ranch was prosperous and well run. The school stood ready for another day of teaching. Their children slept safe and secure. Everything Victoria had left behind in Boston, all the fear and desperation that had driven her west, had led to this moment and this life. The risk she had taken, the leap of faith they had both made, had been rewarded 1,000 times over. She had come to Arizona as a mail-order bride, a term that might have carried shame or desperation. Instead, she had found her place in the world, her purpose, her love, and her home. The harsh beauty of the desert had taught her resilience. The challenges of ranch life had taught her strength. The community she served had taught her the value of every person, regardless of education or station. And Zachary, her humble, kind husband, had taught her that love could be gentle and fierce, patient and passionate, simple and profound all at once. They were a perfect fit, this unlikely pair. She brought education and culture, organization and vision. He brought wisdom earned through hard work, kindness born of genuine humility, strength tempered with gentleness. Together they had built something neither could have created alone. A family, a thriving ranch, a school that changed lives, a legacy of love and respect that would echo through generations. As Victoria drifted into sleep, her last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the courage that had brought her west. Gratitude for the man whose honest letters had promised respect and partnership. Gratitude for the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, with patience and love and unwavering commitment to each other and the values they shared. The story that had begun with fear and uncertainty, with a desperate woman and a lonely man reaching across distance to find connection, had become a love story for the ages. Not the dramatic, tempestuous romance of novels, but something better and more enduring. A quiet, steady love built on respect and compatibility, on complementary strengths and mutual support. The kind of love that lasted because it was rooted in reality rather than fantasy, because it grew stronger with each challenge faced together. Victoria had learned that pride did not have to mean arrogance, that being educated did not make one superior. Zachary had learned that humility did not mean lacking confidence, that kindness was not weakness. Together, they had created a partnership where both could be fully themselves while also being strengthened by the other. Their children would carry these lessons forward. Thomas would run the ranch with his father's fairness and his mother's organizational skills. Sarah would teach with her mother's passion for education and her father's patience. Daniel would grow into leadership tempered by the values his parents modeled. Grace would be raised knowing that women could be both educated and nurturing, both proud and humble. The community they had built around them reflected these values too. The school remained open to all children regardless of their family's means or background. The ranch paid fair wages and treated workers with respect. Neighbors helped each other through difficulties, sharing resources and support. This was the true legacy of Victoria and Zachary Harrison. Not just the physical structures they built, but the culture they created through their example. Years would continue to pass. There would be more challenges and joys, sorrows and celebrations. Thomas would marry Lucy and bring her to live on the ranch, building their own house and starting their own family. Sarah would indeed become a teacher, eventually taking over the school when Victoria was ready to step back. Daniel would find his path, probably involving adventure before he settled into responsibility. Grace would grow up secure and confident, knowing she could be anything she wanted. Victoria and Zachary would age together, their hair turning silver, their faces mapping the years with wrinkles earned from smiling and squinting against the desert sun. They would become grandparents, watching their children raise families with the same values they had instilled. They would sit on their porch in the cool evenings, hands still finding each other automatically, still finding new things to talk about or simply enjoying comfortable silence. The ranch would continue to prosper under their stewardship and later under Thomas's. The school would expand, perhaps eventually splitting into multiple classrooms with several teachers. The community would grow and change, but the foundation laid by that educated, proud Eastern woman and her humble, kind cowboy husband would remain. When Victoria was 70 and Zachary was 77, they would celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, by friends and community members spanning 3 generations, they would reflect on the improbable journey that had brought them together. They would tell the story one more time, about letters exchanged between strangers, about a terrified woman stepping off a train, about a nervous cowboy offering his heart and his home, about 2 people who should not have fit together but did so perfectly. And they would hold hands, these 2 who had grown old together, who had faced every challenge as partners, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely beginnings. They would look at each other with eyes that still held wonder and love, and they would know without words that they would make the same choices again, that the fear and risk had been worth it, that finding each other had been the greatest blessing of their lives. The mail-order bride from Boston and the cowboy from Arizona. The educated, proud woman and the humble, kind man. They fit perfectly, then and always, a testament to the truth that love can grow in the most unexpected places when 2 people bring their best selves to each other, when they choose partnership over pride, humility over arrogance, respect over dominance, and love over everything else. Their story would be remembered long after they were gone, told to children and grandchildren as an example of how different people can come together to create something greater than either could be alone. It would be a story of courage and risk, of growth and compromise, of love that transcended differences and built bridges instead of walls. But on that first night of their marriage, as they lay in the darkness talking in quiet voices, none of this was yet known. They knew only that they were taking a chance on each other, that they were committing to building something together, that they were choosing hope over fear. The rest would unfold day by day, year by year, brick by brick, until they had created a legacy of love that would endure far beyond their own lives. And it all began with honest letters, with humble words from a kind man, with the courage of a proud woman willing to risk everything for a chance at something more, with that first awkward meeting on a dusty platform in Tucson, with a simple wedding in a small church, with two strangers choosing to become partners, and then friends, and then lovers, and finally soulmates. They fit perfectly, this unlikely pair, and their love story would inspire generations to come, reminding people that sometimes the best matches are the unexpected ones, that love can grow anywhere, that humility and pride are not opposites but complementary qualities, and that taking a risk on love is always, always worth it. The mail-order bride and the cowboy found each other across distance and difference, and in finding each other, they each found home,